Hello, everyone. If you're listening to this podcast episode, you probably already know who I have as a guest today. And so I have asked Vitalik if he could. I thought it would be really interesting if Vitalik could introduce himself in a way that maybe like the most rabid Bitcoin maximalists would introduce you. So I know that you like to change the way that you introduce yourself. So I thought it would be funny how to get a little bit meta and have a Bitcoin maximalist introduce Vitalik Buterin.
Yeah, so speaking of meta, so hi, I'm Vitalik Buterin, scammer-in-chief, here to bring the Mark Zuckerberg move fast and break things vision to the crypto space and abandon all hopes of security and sound money and bring on the infinite inflation so we can pray to the gods of Elon Musk and John Maynard Keynes at the same time. So excited to be doing that with you guys today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I pray to the gods of inflation and hope our money supply keeps inflating forever. So this is going to be, I think, a really interesting interview. As far as I know, I think this is probably one of the first times you've been on a kind of, I guess, more explicitly political or left-wing type of platform before. But I think, one of the things that especially I think when it comes to politics, when it comes to crypto, is that crypto is kind of perceived as being one thing, or like being like de facto right wing or de facto this or that, and is often painted with quite a broad brush. So like one of the things that I kind of want to get out of this interview is kind of show to people maybe some of the nuances and differences that are happening in the crypto world and the places where a lot of people in crypto world may disagree with one another, to sort of show where those differences lie. But to start off with that, I think, bouncing off of your introduction to yourself, I was wondering if you can kind of count the differences that there are between the Bitcoin and the Ethereum world. So these are the two largest cryptocurrencies as far as market cap goes. And for a lot of people, they seem like all the same. But I think when you kind of dig into their various communities, you start to maybe realize that they're quite a bit different in a lot of ways.
Sure. So the way that I would describe the Bitcoin community is that they really emphasize the concept of sound money, this idea that they are creating a digital asset. There's 21 million units of it. The asset is not going to inflate anymore. It can't be seized or censored by anyone. And this is just a new form of money. And money is like the most important base layer for an economy. And they're going to basically create this kind of even better and more secure version of money and just let society become, more prosperous in their vision as a result of it, right? So they would say that, any kind of bells and whistles in a blockchain, even trying to support smart contracts and other kinds of things, as generally mostly a distraction. And money is just 100 times more important than all of these other things. And we're all going to get together. We're going to focus on that and just try to create this new monetary unit that is free of inflation, seizure, all of these problems that have beset fiat currency, at least since that dark and infamous executive order from 1933. Right, so that's the Bitcoin, I think, view. The Ethereum view is, I think it's difficult to even say that there is a single view in Ethereum, or at least it's more difficult to say that for Ethereum than it is to say it for Bitcoin, right? Because Ethereum is this much more general purpose platform, which is both a strength and a weakness, right? The strength is that there are just all of these very different groups of people that are building on top of it, right? So there's people, even in Ethereum, there are people who believe in something close to a Bitcoiny sound money vision, except, they believe that Ethereum can do a better job of that than Bitcoin. There are people who believe that with programmable money, we can create better tools for coordination. We can create new kinds of organizations. We can create new ways for people to cooperate with each other. There's people who are interested in blockchain-based non-financial applications. So one of the ways in which they would describe that vision is that 10 or 20 years ago we had open source software, and open source software is like this way to build ways to do things with computers that are not tied to or controlled by single corporations. But then in the years that followed, it turns out that open source was to some extent the wrong conversation to have, because it's not about where the source is, it's about where everyone's data is. And so the blockchain vision is to say, well, we're going to get rid of the servers that have the data as well, right? And we're going to have applications that are open state. And this could be blogs, this could be social media, this could be domain name systems, like pretty much everything, right? So that's another kind of viewpoint. And other viewpoints would be, focusing on like international money transfers and applications that have to do with, things like lending and credit in the developing world. So I think there's just, a lot of different groups with a lot of different viewpoints that coexist within Ethereum, and the ecosystem kind of is all of those put together. Though, of course, the way that Bitcoiners tends to criticize this, right, is they would say, well, the Ethereum ecosystem can't focus, and it kind of keeps on changing its narrative and sort of, pivoting to another one of these when it gets bored of the previous one, right? So I guess that's one of the ways in which you can view what the divide is like.
Yeah, and I guess that, when it comes to Bitcoin, that that specific like hyper focus on money and like wanting to have a hard money that is how to say, like not manipulable by banks or governments is a very and sort of simulates a type of gold, is kind of like a very it simulates, or it imitates kind of like an already existing, I think, conservative political view around money. And I think that, for sure, I think the Ethereum community, like, kind of course, came out of Bitcoin historically a long time ago, of course. And there are some, I think, vestigial properties from it because of that, maybe. But I do hear sometimes, you mentioned in the beginning, like sometimes people talk about like Ether being just like a better form of Bitcoin. I was wondering, do you consider like Ether as money, or like would you like want it to be money?
So the whole money word, I think, is something that's often worth unpacking, right? Like, we have to remember that the ways in which we view monetary units and macroeconomics and all of these things really came of age at a time of paper. And paper imposes a lot of constraints, right? Like, because if you give someone a $5 bill, well, that $5 bill is a $5 bill. You can't just kind of magically pass a software update and have that $5 bill suddenly look like a six the next day or whatever, right? So, it's there's trust limitations on paper-based money. Paper has to represent something. There's limits to how quickly it can be issued. There's limits to how easily it can be verified. There's just like a whole bunch of different constraints that we inherited, and often these are constraints that we don't realize are constraints that don't really exist anymore, right? And so, as a result, you have these debates that basically assume that, like, for example, the medium of exchange, the store value, and the unit of account have to be the same thing, right? Like, like, what's the standard Keynesian story for why, it's better to have your currency be slightly inflationary than slightly deflationary, right? Basically because there's limits to how quickly and how effectively the prices can adjust. And for various weird economic reasons, it just so happens that prices adjust upward more easily than prices adjust downward. And so if you have a currency that goes up, then, or sorry, if you have a currency where prices in that currency on average go up, then things are less likely to break in horrible ways than if things are going in the other direction, right? But this is all assuming that the sticker price, like the thing that prices are set in, is denominated in the same asset that everyone is holding, right? Which was obviously true 50 years ago, and obviously true 100 years ago. But if you even look at the cryptocurrency economy today, right, like if you look at people who actually charge things in Bitcoin or charge things in ETH, you'll find pretty much all of them, they set their prices in US dollars or euros or whatever other fiat currency, and then they accept ETH or Bitcoin or Doge or whatever else they want to accept, right? So unit of account and medium of exchange have already been split. Medium of exchange and store value have been split. The thing held by the sender and the thing held by the receiver have been split. That's actually not even something that required any decentralized technology. Like that's even a feature of credit cards today, right? Like if you use your credit card internationally, there's some weird magic happening in the back end, and I might be decreasing my balance in dollars or Swiss francs or whatever other currency, and then the person receiving money might be receiving Mexican pesos, right? Or so it's like these are all assumptions that have already been steadily weakened by technology, and I think they're going to be steadily even more weakened by technology over time. And so well, no, I guess let's see. What's my conclusion here? Like my conclusion is just that any money discourse that came out of the 1930s or 1970s is probably outdated and not nearly imaginative enough, and we need to really look at crypto not so much as a thing that gives us the one true option, but more as a toolbox that opens up more possibilities.
That's interesting. Yeah, the way that I've had it sort of, or like the concepts that I think I've had it best explained, as far as because some people will argue, well, I can go and buy stuff with my Bitcoin or Ether if I go on the internet and they accept it, and therefore it's money. But I think what's actually happening, what you were talking about earlier with like the magical box, is sort of like is what Brett Scott, a writer, he calls it counter trade. Basically, you're just like using different assets, but you have in your head like the value of the actual money that you're being used to kind of like swap the things that you're kind of wanting to exchange. So like counter trade is kind of what's happening whenever you're like buying things with cryptocurrency, right, for the most part, unless it is denominated in cryptocurrency, but
usually it's not. Exactly. It's it's interesting how if we want to like start imagining monetary systems of the future, you could even think of some pretty exotic ones, right? Like you could even imagine a world where the central bank is just an entity that issues a CPI. And that CPI is denominated just in, Bitcoin and ETH and DAI and every major whatever the major currencies are that people use. And that's the thing that people just choose to, denominate their salaries and rent in. And nobody ever actually has units of the thing, and it's not even possible to have base units of the thing. It's just an index, right? So like you can separate the the money in the sense of the thing that people count in from the kind of asset that people have on balance sheets, like even completely if it wants to. I mean that's not necessarily something that people wants to do, right? But like that space exists, which is like kind of mind blowing because that totally did not exist pretty much before the internet came about.
Yeah, I think I think for me and for a lot of people, I think the existence of cryptocurrencies and blockchain does sort of force you a little bit to question kind of like assumptions that we had before, just because kind of like a lot of things that were not possible before are technically possible now. I think right now we're kind of more at the space of like as well trying to figure out whether that's desirable or not. Because I think some people can imagine kind of like a a plural monetary system, or like where different types of monies are like used for different things. And I think that is an interesting idea. I think it just like highly depends on like the execution
Yes.
of that. Because I think at the same time, I think people don't want to think about like, oh no, are my like, are my are my Zuck bucks going to like drop in value in the next 10 days, or do I need to trade that into like Bitcoins now? Like I think that's kind of like an issue that people, I think, understandably are like a bit hesitant on wanting to accept. But I think there are perhaps like more positive visions around the idea of kind of thinking of like a plural monetary system, in the sense that I think our current existing monetary system is very like I've kind of heard it like it's sort of accounting for one type of value, financial in the sense that our world is kind of like over indexed in thinking about financial value for nearly everything. So yeah, I think there are probably, hopefully, more positive ways to think about that problem than people having to worry about trading their Zuck bucks.
Absolutely.
But so you recently published your book Proof of Stake, which is essentially a collection of different essays that you've written over the years. And the book is also edited by Nathan Schneider, a friend of the podcast, where he kind of like gives really, really good context for the moments in time in which you're kind of writing these different pieces that are mostly on your blog, I think. But maybe, do you want to talk about the book and sort of like what you were trying to do with it, and like how you went about choosing the essays? I think what's really interesting about it is that it's kind of it's organized in three sections, as I think it was minting, I think, or pre-minting, proof of work, and then proof of stake. So kind of also aligning with kind of like the technical stages of Ethereum. So you can kind of see perhaps a little bit, you can pull out kind of your maybe different types of thoughts that are happening at different moments of maturity of the Ethereum blockchain, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think it's definitely important to give a lot of credit to Nathan for the book. He reached out to me with the idea of making it. He was definitely responsible for a lot of the content selection, and then obviously for connecting us with 7 stories and working with them to actually get the thing out. I think the goal was to try to basically try to give a kind of less scattered and more sort of coherent presentation of some of the philosophy behind thinking that went into Ethereum, thinking that went into a lot of the applications that are in various parts of the crypto space now, and to basically show like how or what are some of the big themes that people have been thinking about, and by people I mean both myself, but also obviously all of the various people that I've been reacting to, and the people that ended up reacting to those individual pieces and so forth, and just show things like how did the discourse and the challenges of let's say financialized governance in crypto come about. How did thinking about obviously proof of stake itself evolve over time? How did the thinking about decentralized organizations evolve over time? And basically just create this kind of presentation of all of those ideas together in one place, so that people can see it all together, instead of it kind of just being this very scattered collection of blog posts all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think most of them are on your website, but I think it gives just like a single place where you can kind of go through, I guess, kind of chronologically, to be more able to kind of pick up, to understand the context, I guess, when these things are created, rather than kind of randomly coming across maybe like a blog post or two of yours. Because I mean, a lot of them I think I had read before, but like I read them a while ago, or like, I didn't necessarily make the connection between the different blog posts and how they're related as far as like, context and time in which it was happening. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It was easier to sort of like to track all those things. But I guess for you, considering that structure of the book, do you see, now that Ethereum is post-merge, do you see Ethereum kind of as likely to be to continue maturing and to kind of be qualitatively different than like the pre-merge Ethereum that sort of like, I guess most people are thinking of or are aware of at this point?
I feel like Ethereum becomes qualitatively different from itself like about every 3 or 4 years so far, right? Like there's definitely a lot of strands of ideas that are common all the way through, right? The concept of stable coins, for example, like people have been working on DAI since like back in 2015, and that team itself came out of people that were doing the same thing in BitShares before that. One of them, Nikolai, unfortunately passed away recently, but he was really
Yeah.
great guy. I remember him even back in the BitShares days. So this was both a group of people and that was just really passionately pursuing an intellectual effort where just the core idea really was the same all the way through, but then just saw all of these kind of leaps and bounds of maturity, and it started off being this kind of fairly simple stable coin, and then started talking about real world assets, and then the whole DAO and decentralized governance aspect became more sophisticated. Prediction markets, like there was Augur back in 2015, and then there is Poly Market this year. ENS was one of the ideas in the white paper. So there's a lot of these like threads that have persisted in Ethereum all the way, but at the same time, there's definitely these really big evolutions inside of them, right? Like one of the big evolutions that I alluded to, I think, is definitely this kind of growing realization of the need for non-financialized governance, right? So, that's one that took a while. I mean, that's that's one that took me a while because to a large extent, like that realization grew out of years of me trying really hard to make financialized governance work, right? Like my model
Right.
there was basically to like thinking of governance as being this kind of technical problem in the same way that secure Byzantine fault tolerant proof of stake is a technical problem, right? Like with proof of stake algorithms, you can make protocols that have these really clean properties that say if more than 2/3 of the participants are honest or even are independently rational, then the thing is going to work. And they don't even technically have to be rational. They just have to be balanced on how much money they're willing to lose. And so if you accept these couple of things, then you can like create these really clean 20-line mathematical proofs of all of these other things, right? And so started thinking
Right.
through like, can we create something similar for governance, and whacked my head against the wall on that question a bunch of times. And I think the place where I realized that was a dead end was actually when Glenn introduced me to quadratic funding. Basically, because like with quadratic funding, you can actually see the logic for why it actually does have these mathematically clean kind of proofs of why, at least under its assumptions, it's supposed to work, right? You have this argument that like your vote or like how much you contribute reflects the strength of your preference, but then the more that you vote, the greater a percentage you are of the whole thing, and so the less public that good is relative to you to some extent. And but so if you vote more or if you contribute more to a project, then you deserve a bigger subsidy, but maybe you don't deserve a linearly bigger subsidy. And there's just like all of these arguments, and you just convert them into math equations, that it just like works out really cleanly. But then once you start just kind of philosophically poking one level deeper, and you realize one of the really important things in quadratic funding, which is the collusion issue, right? Like, if someone can pretend to be two people, then they can cheat quadratic funding, right? And they can like extract money and break the system. It's This is one of the points that I made in my blog a couple of times, right? Like when people criticize traditional economics, right? Like they often criticize, assumptions like perfect competition and unlimited public information and perfect rationality and all of these. And it's like important to criticize them. But the one that's like even more or breaks things even more quickly that people don't remember to criticize at all is this assumption of the uncoordinated actors, right? This idea that you have these different actors, and when they're making the decisions, they consider their own interests separately, but they don't talk to each other, right? And there's this like entire really amazing literature of these mechanisms, like second price auction, VCGs, and this really complicated stuff that people have been coming up with over the past 50 years, where they have these really clean proofs that show why their thing is optimal, but their proof always relies on this idea that you never have two actors that are cooperating with each other. And once you have that, then the proofs just unravel. And often it so happens that like the more an algorithm really effectively optimizes for the case where no one's cooperating, the faster it breaks when even two people are cooperating, right? And with quadratic funding, like quadratic funding is actually, I mean, Glenn, I think acknowledges that it's like a little bit less general and like less all-encompassing than some of these VCGs, but it's significantly more robust to groups of people cooperating with each other, but it's still not robust enough, right? And so once you look into this philosophically, what you realize is basically that, like, if the mechanism that gives you the correct answer is a mechanism that breaks once people are allowed to cooperate even a little bit, then what that means is that there basically cannot be a mechanism that gives you the correct answer without relying on information, some kind of information sort of passed in from the outside about, how friendly the different actors are with each other. And I thought that was interesting and fascinating. And it's like a limitation that I was forced to acknowledge because, the math was staring me in the face, and I couldn't really argue with it. But at the same time, you have to understand that this is a pretty serious challenge to kind of purist conceptions of, the crypto-y vision for how to reorganize the world. Because if, especially if you think through like purist crypto ideas about, let's say, supporting anonymity and not caring about identity, and the whole, valorizing the idea that, you don't know if it's a dog behind the keyboard, right? On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog is like the usual phrase, right? Like, if it turns out that like taking those principles 100% seriously basically means that like, well, mechanisms for collectively allocating capital just like can't work, and they just necessarily break as soon as groups of people try to cooperate or someone tries to bribe someone else, which by the way, smart contracts do make it incredibly easy to do, then you realize that there is a problem with at least like that pure version of the idea, and whatever the idea is, you have to kind of modify it a bit. And I think that's a big part of what the at least my crypto governance sort of research and thinking since then has been trying to do.
Yeah. So I think that's really, really interesting that you say that. There's a lot of things I kind of want to pull on that. I think that was what especially I noticed in like the very beginning, in 2016, especially when I was like first reading and like getting interested into this topic, that a lot of people were sort of coming from definitely a very like Austrian economic like inspired kind of point of view for like when it comes to economics, when it comes to like a lot of these things that you're talking about, and they would kind of they would call smart contracts and like cryptocurrencies as kind of like the ultimate, like finally we can make this kind of like vision a reality, and there was kind of like this particular framing it like imposed. But what I thought was really funny is that at the same time, you know, you had this, of course, the idea of like decentralized autonomous corporations, which was the first, and then you made the suggestion to call them organizations and DAOs, and that stuck, and I think that was like a very good recommendation to make clearly. Where people would say like, now we can sort of create, you know, Uber, but without the Uber company. And, you know, we can use smart contracts to kind of like mathematically, you know, have like this perfect company. But to me, like for me, when I was reading all this stuff, to me, I felt like smart contracts were like a really, really good potential like medium for facilitating collective action and like collective endeavors and like sort of like collectively minded things than kind of what people were kind of at that point especially like trying to do. So I thought it was interesting. Like to me, you talk a lot in your essays in the book about collusion and about whether people cooperate with one another or not. And to me, what I think of, for me, it's like, of course, people are always going to collude in one way or another, or like are going to like collectively try and do something. And we see this. I mean, one example, of course, is you can think of it in terms of like companies working together to like to increase their profits, or they collude on like price setting or whatever. But then as well, you have that on maybe like the other side where you have like labor unions, where labor unions are kind of like in one way, I think if you're anti-labor union, you might say that labor unions are, you know, workers colluding with one another to sort of like to do this or that. But I guess in my framework, from like a left-wing point of view, I would say that that's collective action, right. And that's sort of like, you know, necessary to happen because they have like an interest for that, and because if they don't, then the other side is colluding anyway.
Yeah, actually, so maybe a question for you here. Like, what are some of the first kind of collective action-y applications of smart contracts that you had in mind?
When I had in mind, I mean, when I was first starting off, I mean, when I first started off, I mean, I think I had some pretty wild ideas, and then I kind of like tempered my expectations after I learned a lot more. But I think, I mean, for me, what I am still interested in, of course, is like, I mean, what people are kind of like getting at with DAOs at the moment, but I think hasn't necessarily been fully realized yet. I think we're seeing like the seeds of it. But certainly people are trying to make that effort and are kind of getting there, but just like collectively shared resources and sort of being able to democratically allocate things in particular ways that have like real consequences to them. Which I found also interesting. I think in one of like, even like one of your early essays, I think in maybe the first section of the book, you talk about how blockchains or crypto are kind of like a like people kind of impose what their frame of mind is, or like what the framework that they're working with, and like that's kind of like blockchain is like, oh, perfect for that. So like for me, like you mentioned economic democracy. So I think I was definitely more on like the economic democracy side, and thinking about creating sort of resilient networks or systems, applications in which you can facilitate different forms of economic democracy. But at the same time, the vast majority of like the writing and like the think pieces around crypto and blockchain, I think in the beginning were more about how to create very efficient markets, or like how to have like you know, the perfect you know, price on this or that. So it was like, for a long time I was like, but it doesn't have to be that. And so it's like, for a long time I was kind of like, I was just kind of holding on to like, maybe it could happen. I think eventually my feeling was that at some point the space was going to mature, because my bet, just like from my like from the framework that I was working with, was that probably a lot of these things aren't going to work out in the way that they think they are. And so there's going to have to be some kind of like maturation and like realization that in order for crypto or blockchains to be attractive for people, is that they have to offer kind of more, in my opinion, just like more collective solutions, or like to give a greater sort of like democratic input for people to be able to have more control over their lives. Because I think what attracts a lot of people to crypto and blockchains is because they feel disillusioned by kind of like the system as it exists right now. And so, and in my opinion, like the reason why we have this disillusionment is kind of like the feeling that we have very little control over kind of the institutions that we are like forced to live under and forced to be under. And so by offering an alternative where, hey, your voice actually matters and you can actually be a part of this thing and you have influence, would probably be a more positive vision than necessarily convincing people that, hey, on blockchain we have perfect markets.
Yeah. What do you think is your favorite blockchain application right now?
My favorite blockchain application right now. For me, maybe I'm biased, but I think my favorite one right now is the one that I made with my cooperative called Bread Chain. I think that's my favorite one right now, just because I was involved in making it.
Well, what does Bread Chain do?
So Bread Chain, in case you don't know, it's kind of like this meta organization project that I've been working on as a way to kind of explore slightly more, let's say using a different framework for thinking about blockchain applications that are not necessarily purely profit oriented or financially oriented, I guess you could say. Although finance is definitely a part of it. It's kind of like a federation of different projects that align in values. So you can call that perhaps maybe more left-wing if you want, but we align in values, and we kind of are using and exploring different applications for, facilitating our organization and our federation. But we recently created an application called the crowd staking application, where it's basically just a smart contract where you send DAI to the smart contract forwards it to Aave, and it accumulates interest off of Aave, and all of the interest go towards the cooperative. But as a user, you receive back one-to-one in collateral, a bread token. It's basically like wrapped DAI essentially, and you can use that bread token as as if you would use DAI, so like a dollar denominated stablecoin, or you can also just burn it and you would receive back the DAI. So it's always like 100% collateralized, and the cooperative is just taking the rights to the interest. And so this is like my first attempt at trying to make what I call a solidarity primitive. So like rather than financial primitives that kind of in DeFi people are really interested in, or like these money Legos, people like to call them. I kind of wanted to figure out ways in which you can use smart contracts to kind of automate solidarity in groups. So like that was kind of like our first attempt at trying to explore how this works. And like I think this kind of token is you can think of it as like a local digital currency, where kind of using this localized as far as like in value alignment, and digital because it's cryptocurrency, you can kind of be sure that you are helping fund like this federation or this group who are working on various projects that are that align with your values.
Got it.
So I'm super biased. That's cool. That's my favorite. But I also but I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in like in DAO tools that I think are interesting as well. But yeah, I wanted to just say that what I do really respect about you is that you are pretty open about your evolution of things, that which you can see in the book and which you've like talked about here already. And then you're also like a pretty clear writer, so it's pretty easy to like follow your logic whenever I read your pieces, and even if I disagree on maybe like a point or two here and there, I can at least like follow your logic to know how you got to that point, which I think is like really nice. And usually the logic is not so like I don't know, something that I can't handle, or something that like because there are of course other writers that I read that I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this, and then when I read yours, I'm like, okay, I can handle this, and this is like I can very much understand how he got to that point, even though we may disagree. And so one of the things that I did notice as well in your pieces is that I thought it was interesting that you also like warn, like even in like kind of the early days, you do warn about kind of basically fascism, I guess you could say, or like extreme right-wing political ideology a couple of times, which I thought was interesting. Like you mentioned, like I think in your essay on crypto cities, you mentioned like do you want America to become like the dictatorship, the Portuguese dictatorship of Salazar, and then you and as well or as a monarchy, so like that, and then you like linked to these like crazy right-wing articles about people actually was saying that like we should be like a dictatorship like Salazar, or you had Curtis Yarvin saying that America should become a monarchy, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah,
yeah. So I wonder if you had thoughts on on reflections on that.
On what are my thoughts on right-leaning people getting into crypto? It's I mean, I think in general, like this is this is like one of the reasons why I think I might have said a couple of times that I think horseshoe theory is underrated, and it's like it actually is more true than some people acknowledge, that like there are similarities between people that we would call far and as opposed to center. And what I mean by that is that like if you have a belief that's like significantly like pretty far away from just like whatever the status quo is, then just by necessity you're going to have to use different kinds of ideas and different kinds of techniques to try to get there, right? Because your path to success is not just like, hey, let's convince 5 senators. Your path to success is not going to be like, hey, let's convince Twitter staff to adopt slightly different policies, or convince voters of this kind of one tiny thing, right? Like, if you're imagining a very different society than what exists today, whether that society is in the sort of direction you want, or the sort of direction I want, or the sort of direction Curtis Yarvin wants, or whoever else, then like, you are like, you're not going to do it by just walking into MSNBC and just like blabbing about it for a bit, and then lobbying in Washington for a bit and just getting it out there, right? Like it's you pretty much have to do something that's pretty kind of more radical in some ways, right? And I think crypto is one of those technologies that does make it possible to do radical things. And using the word radical kind of very neutrally there, right? Like, because I think people have had all kinds of visions that they've kind of grafted onto crypto, and we've I think seen that from all kinds of people on the right. We've seen that from people on the left. We've seen that from anti-American internationalists. We've seen that from a kind pro-American kind of human rights people that are actually totally happy with the U.S. running the world because that's they think it's much less bad than all the other countries, but and they see crypto as a compliment, right? So crypto does kind of attach itself to a lot of different viewpoints, but if your viewpoint is that it is one that just says things need to look very different from the way they look today, then like you have to pick a technology that's capable of like making a very different world happen, and crypto does like actually fit into that box, right? So I think that's my fairly simple story for why crypto is exciting to people who have big dreams and big visions for a world that looks very different from the world of today, whether different in a way we agree in or different in a way we disagree in. But crypto is not so enticing for people who think that the biggest problem in the world is that the top income tax rate is 39.6% instead of 43.4%, right? So that's
Sure.
yeah, and then it does feel like pretty much like all kinds of interesting people and people who are kind of independently minded in various ways. They do end up going through crypto at some point. Even if their eventual vision for how to fix the world does end up basically saying like, hey, we actually want more elitism and more centralization. So that's it's definitely a phenomenon. It's definitely something that happens, and I think it can it's something that can have all kinds of effects. Like I definitely think there are people who want to see a world that looks very different from today, and then they discover the crypto space, but then the crypto space ends up shaping how they understands their own values and what kind of world in particular they want to see, right? And sometimes in a more libertarian direction, sometimes in a more democratic direction, and often their starting point is one where the libertarian direction and the democratic direction are the same, and in which case, great. So it's there is like a lot of different people and a lot of different opinions and in different situations, and it's like really hard to make make generalities that speak for all of them. But like, I guess like I I just like I get why people who wants to see big changes are attracted to cryptocurrency as a technology for making big changes happen, right? And it's important to remember that cryptocurrency is not the first technology that people put political hopes in. Like the internet, I think as well, right? Like a lot of people put political hopes in the internet. And I do think that cryptocurrency is different from the internet, right? Like the way that I think cryptocurrency is different from the internet is that the internet was just it was a big enough leap over pretty much everything that it's is just an obvious win even from completely non-ideological commercial points of view. And so the commercial points of view just kind of ended up largely winning out over time because there's more money in them, right? But with cryptocurrency, obviously there is speculation as a commercial application, and speculation has been big in the crypto space since day one, of course. But aside from that, it's it does seem to have this kind of more fundamental property that if you want to use so I'll put it in a different way. The difference between the internet and email is efficiency. Like it's efficiency in a between the internet and like snail mail is efficiency in a very raw technical sense. It's efficiency of a type that both Mother Teresa and U.S. anarchists and Mussolini would have agreed. Like yes, this is efficiency. I understand it. Cryptocurrency versus fiat is not efficiency in the same way. And crypto social versus Twitter is not efficiency in the same way, right? And so you do have to have a particular mindset in order to even find it appealing, especially in the early stages where you're kind of really going uphill against some pretty powerful network effects, right? But that's so that's like the way that I think crypto is different from the internet, but it's similar in that it is a technology, and people put a lot of political hopes in a technology, and people do tend to kind of put political hopes into a technology. When they do feel that kind of approaches that are more like, hey, let's keep doing things existing ways and relying on existing channels as just not good enough for them anymore. And do I agree, right, or do I disagree with their program? Well, it depends on what their program is, right? It just so happens that I would not want to see the U.S. controlled by a king. I mean, yeah.
You don't want to see like tech CEO monarchies started?
No, it's like, see, what are my views on monarchy? Is like, it's fine if you have like 150K people off in an island, and if you're unhappy, then it's like pretty easy to hop off to the next one. But like if you start taking over an existing place where people have lots of existing expectations and existing investments, and just grew up and put their entire lives into a completely a different model, and one that the entire world depends on, like that ends up looking really different, right? So yeah, I think yeah. I would not expect good things to come from from America having a CEO anytime soon.
Yeah, fair. Agreed. Yeah, I think so it seems to me that for sure, like crypto has been attracting just a lot of very disillusioned people with just like the status quo, and I think a lot of people who are in this position are not necessarily considering themselves like left or right maybe at first, and they just are kind of like attracted to crypto because they see it as like this potentially revolutionary thing that can like break out of the boundaries of like the material existence right now, that can maybe like be very, very helpful to radically change things towards something better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think but unfortunately, like as it exists right now, I think the pipeline is much larger towards, I mean, for me, it's unfortunately much larger towards, I think, like right-wing politics generally, maybe more towards kind of like, they may use like Austrian school stuff, and they may use this or that, but also I think, in my view, like the act of like being under the pressures of constant financial speculation, which is kind of the ways that people get into crypto a lot of the time, that kind of lends itself towards more conservative political views at the same time as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of
Absolutely.
the issue.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of really interesting questions in there, right? I mean, one of the questions is it a crypto to right-wing politics pipeline, or is it a right-wing politics to crypto pipeline, or both? And
I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, for sure.
Another one is like, right-wing politics itself is not a static organism, right? And I feel like a lot of people's mindsets have changed a lot in the last 10 years, right? And I mean, I remember back in 2013 and 2014, like in some ways, so I view 2013 and 2014 as being kind of this great divergence moment, both for the crypto space and for U.S. politics. And I mean, I wasn't following international stuff as closely back then, but possibly for some international politics as well, right? So if you remember, go back to Bitcoin talk before 2013, it's actually a really fascinating place, right? Because back then, Bitcoin was all that existed. And Bitcoin was this kind of surprisingly friendly and peaceful forum for political activists of many very different kinds to kind of come together and talk to each other, right? Like there was this politics and society forum, and there would just often be libertarians and socialists that would just, fairly peacefully have these long forum debates. I send 3 paragraphs, you send 5 paragraphs. He sends 8 paragraphs, and maybe it goes back down at some point eventually. And just having sophisticated discussions about all kinds of topics, whether it's taxes and welfare, whether it's the minimum wage, whether it's health and safety regulations, like whatever the topic is, and there would be these very deep and intellectual discussions about it. And there really were, like, especially in like early 2012 to 2013 Bitcoin, both what we would consider right-leaning and what we would consider left-leaning voices that were there, right? And sometime around like just that time, things really started diverging, right? So that was the time when cryptocurrency kind of splintered into both the big versus small block issue on the Bitcoin side, and Ethereum split off from Bitcoin. And then pretty soon after, even more of these kind of smaller crypto communities split off from Ethereum. And then, in the mainstream world, like that's when Trump started getting bigger, and that's when a whole bunch of other complicated changes started happening on the right. And look, one of the things that kind of I think has made me more and more unhappy with the right over time is that, like, whatever your the flaws are of Austrian economics, like, at least it is an intellectual model, and it does present arguments, and you can engage with them as arguments. If you look at things like like the newer kind of canonical right wing literature, I don't know, Bronze Age mindset is like the one that comes to mind, right? Like, it's people don't try to create complicated theoretical justifications for stuff from first principles. It's like vibes, man, right? It's it's just like a big
right. It's like you're either a soy boy or you're like a big like carnivore.
Exactly, and like people
like only eats red meat.
Exactly, and people's marketing for their viewpoint is like, oh, hey, herder, obviously, if you eat soy, you're a loser, and obviously, these guys want us to eat bugs and and live in pods, and that's bad, and we're the bros and we're chads, and like you're supposed to just like. That stuff continues to exist, so clearly, like, there are audiences that it appeals to, and I don't know fully what happens. I mean, there's different theories. I mean, one of the kind of more black pill theories is that it was just kind of inevitable because later stage internet technology is just inherently are about making these kind of short viral messages, and just it encourages engagement both from everyone regardless of kind of what their just intellectual level is, or what their depth of engagement on any particular topic is, and this is just the kind of discourse that wins in that context. Or there's more contingent theories that say that, like, like that previous version of economic rightist theories ended up running its course post 2008, and something happens to needed to be around to replace it. There's like lots of ways to analyze the situation, but it's I don't know. I mean, the end result of it, right? Like basically, the Bronze Age pervert kind of like internet chad, right? Like that's it's definitely not a faction that appeals to me, and it's not a faction that intuitively seems to me like it is likely to have good answers for how to continue to have a great society into the next half century, and deal with all of the various economic and technological challenges. But like that's just me, and maybe someone will just someone else with that viewpoints will either make an intelligent robot or just call me a soy boy and call it a day. We'll see.
I would imagine the second, probably. I mean, the usual. I mean, yeah, for me, having kept up with it for some time, is just that it is usually that there's always like this faction, like very large faction on the right that just is somehow very good at pumping out narratives for like very simple solutions to, like, even if the problem that they're trying to point at is quite is like maybe a worthy one to solve, is like are probably much more complicated than they would like to give the intellectual thought
Absolutely.
towards. I was gonna ask a question that I forgot. So I think it would be interesting if, as well, maybe thinking about, like, how then would you characterize your own politics? Is there a Buterinism yet as a political thought, or I'm curious, like what your thoughts are like at this moment, because I think as well they have changed since the beginning. It seems to me. But
That's a good question. Like, yeah, it's interesting because, like, I remember I made that poll or series of polls on Twitter about a month or two ago, and I asked people like, am I left leaning? Am I right leaning? Am I woke? Am I based? Am I pro globalism? And I got like very 50-50 answers on a lot of these, and. In terms of like what I think about myself, I don't know. I feel like I'm definitely realizing that like I haven't thought about myself in the context of a particular mainstream label in a long time. Trying to think through why, right? Like, because I.
Well, I will say that sometimes, there are people, like there's a fair amount of people who will say that you are, that surely you're like a leftist, or like you must be a socialist in one way or another. But like I personally wouldn't like, based on what I've read as well of you, I wouldn't necessarily say that, and I wouldn't like impose that on you as like, yes, you are one. I like claim you as one of mine necessarily. But I think that it seems that you are also in like a pretty tough position, I guess, where you are, wanting to be, I think, I guess like credibly neutral, as I think you've referred to before, to like be, to use your spots as like a kind of influential figure without necessarily like angering like a huge group or something like that. I think is maybe part of the part of the challenge that you specifically have.
Yeah, I think. Well, I definitely feel like I've kind of come to get more acquainted with that emotion more as I've kind of been in this spotlight longer, and I feel like I understand it more. Right, like it's. Especially when you end up being this kind of bridge figure in the middle of a whole bunch of these very different and very kind of complicated and diverse communities, and like for myself, that's it just ended up being true in all kinds of ways. Like the Ethereum community itself is pretty diverse internally, and then there's all of these academic communities that I've been following closely, and then I've been just as a result of my fairly nonstop travel the last 9.5 years, I've ended up, in the middle of like a whole bunch of different places and different countries, and like I definitely totally get, and I do sometimes feel that emotion of like fear of disappointing people, and this. It's like if I have a viewpoint, and even if I believe it, like there's if I see a well-meaning person that I feel would be upset by just seeing me have that viewpoint, like that's definitely like. So, like, there's definitely moments where I just, there are things that matter enough to me that like I pretty much have to say them. But like, that like that emotion is definitely
Sure.
there, right? And I feel like I can understand more, like especially where some of like more mainstream figures that the media tends to kind of fairly easily dismiss as being cowards if they refuse to kind of criticize whatever people, right? Like it's. I think, like so. To be clear, I think they're often wrong to do that, and there are times when, like, I would have been probably been braver than they were, and but at the same time, like, it feels like there's this sort of zeitgeist that if you're like, basically, there's this sort of very there's this kind of like, how to describe it. internalized capitalism, maybe like it's like there's like internalized racism and internalized capitalism, and the mindset is like if someone does anything that's misaligned,
I like that.
the way that they're being misaligned is money, which is it's right. So if someone is afraid of criticizing a particular group, like it's because they have a $75 million advertising contract and they don't want to lose that money. It's like bro, people are afraid of, or people are willing to lose huge chunks of money if they strongly believe in something all the time. Just look at Kanye, right? But at the just
that's one example.
But like at the same time, people are so this concept.
Do you think that you get accused of like not wanting to be critical because like you're trying to hold your bags up or something
I'm sure there's definitely people who do say things like that, but I think even to the extent that like I have acted in misaligned ways in the past, like my guess would be that if you can like point out a situation and like if on reflection I decide today that yes, I was wrong there, it's like 90% chance it's not because of financial reasons, it's for social reasons, right? Like all of these people, and myself included, like we have friends in all of these regions, and we have people with in all kinds of communities that just have these different mindsets but at the same time they're just really good people, and like don't want to disappoint them. So that definitely exists. But at the same time, like this year, for example, I was obviously very willing to be critical of Russia invading Ukraine, and I thought that was just it's a situation that was important enough to be worth it, and that's definitely one where I basically did sacrifice my ability to safely go back to Russia for quite a while, but it's. And that's obviously a really extreme case, right? Like in some ways, wars are like the most extreme form of, or one of the most extreme collective human experiences in all kinds of ways, like both in terms of the negative emotions they generate, but also even in terms of the positive emotions that they generate between people who end up being on the same side of them. But so that would be one example, but. Mm-hmm. So, yes, and I'm sure to some extent, like the desire to not alienate particular people affects me, though that is definitely something that I intentionally try compensating for. Though, at the same time, it's interesting. Like the other thing is that for a pretty long while recently, like I have had this realization that I think like Western culture in particular does have this a kind of pretty strong negativity bias in a lot of ways, right? Like people's first instinct when evaluating many kinds of things is like, oh, how is this bad, right? Like, people's first instinct in when they see a government policy is like, oh, the regulator must be malevolent. People's first instinct in seeing some corporate change in policy is like, oh, these people are greedy and we have to oppose them. And there's just like this, like, on all sides, there is this actual desire to kind of see negatives before seeing positives. And when I just like think back to, the kinds of conversations I would have, in like, the 1.5 years I spent in China, for example, or in, even talking to just non-Western people in general, or even just talking to Western people who are less politically engaged, like you don't see that negativity to the same extent, right? And so I think it's like it is important to try to not let negativity get to you as well, right? And that's like that does lead to probably different conclusions and different mindsets in a lot of ways. And I think it might even be a mindset that's kind of more appropriate to the crypto space, right? Because like if your way of engaging with the politics of the world is that there are people proposing bills and so a lot of those bills are bad and you have to oppose them, then like your mindset basically is going to be like, hey, what's the next threat, right? But if like crypto isn't really opposing things to the same extent as it is like creating new alternatives, and when you're creating new alternatives, then the the work ends up being like the kind of stuff that you think about ends up being different. And when you see like, if you're left leaning and you see a right leaning person suggest an idea, like one way to think about it is like, oh, this is evil. Another way to think about it is like, well, I disagree with some of the valences, but there is a really important underlying kernel here, and like, let me figure out what is my version of that, right? Or if you're a right leaning person, and you see a left leaning person suggest something, like, and you might ask like, well, what is my version of that? And that's like a question that I think is really important to ask, and can be really productive to be asking. But I don't know. I guess I got rambly there because as I don't know, you started asking what are my political perspectives, and I just mentioned that I don't kind of fall on a map as easily, and like maybe that's one of the reasons why, right? Like, because if your mindset is this kind of traditional partisan politics mindset, and you are a person of the libertarian side, and your main way of relating to questions is like, is it libertarian, is it authoritarian? If it's authoritarian, I'm going to oppose it. Or is it economically hierarchical or economically egalitarian? If it's economically hierarchical, I'm going to oppose it. Like, that's it makes it easier to kind of see where you are in terms of parties. But like, if your way of relating to questions is, okay, well, we'll look at ideas. What are aspects that I like? And if I like them, then I'll support it. And if there are aspects that I dislike, well, my way of relating to that that initial idea will be to say, like, here's aspects that I appreciate and here's aspects that I disagree with. Then it's like having an kind of an identity conception of yourself as belonging to a side just sort of becomes less natural in a lot of ways. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's about also like how willing or how often you use kind of heuristics to try and like come up with a judgment quickly. I think that's also kind of how
yes.
I imagine that plays into. I mean, I guess for me, I definitely have like my political heuristics are based off of like my political understanding of the world, and I definitely do, of course, like administer quick judgment if I find something that I think is distasteful. Yes. Of course, I try not to do that like too much as like or I try to give at least people like the space to talk about stuff, especially like I think I've proven that in my podcast. I talk to people who don't agree with me all the time. But yeah, I think it also depends on just like the context that you're in, of course, like whether or not it makes sense to make that judgment right at that moment or whether to make that judgment later. But yeah, I think a lot of I mean, just like for you, I just imagine it's a tough thing to be in the position that you're in, and like to be to even want to be mapped on the political spectrum, just because I mean, whichever choice you make, you're going to anger someone, of course, but as well, I mean, I guess what is nice about your position in comparison to what you see in the Bitcoin space, where in Bitcoin, it really is like, from what I see, just like 99% of the people who are like these big figureheads and speakers about Bitcoin and Bitcoin maximalists, they are almost exclusively like very far right, which is so I think maybe just because you are not explicitly very far right, that makes you like more of a breath of fresh air for a lot of people.
That is true, yes.
Because you're not telling me that I need to eat red meat and calling me a soy boy.
It's interesting that the right got associated with meat, right? I actually this is funny. I was talking to an Indian a couple of months back, and I mean, just keep in mind this is one Indian, and India is like the one super big country that I've been to the least. So I'm just kind of uncritically parroting their viewpoint. But their viewpoint is that in India, it's vegetarianism that is associated with kind of right-leaning Hindu nationalism. And, it's like, okay, the connotations there are opposite. And like, these are the kinds of things that totally happen all the time. But like, yeah, like you could so easily make a just so story that's like, oh, the right says that hierarchy is natural, and and the hierarchy being natural is the main principle, and this is why the rich should rule over the poor, and why the man should rule over the woman, and why the man should rule over the cow, and so I'm going to eat the cow. But like at the same time, but then you realize that like, wait, no, it's just the existence of these other cultures and other contexts shows that it's
Right.
just totally not universal, and it's like it's not a side so much as it is a strand, right? Like a side is kind of natural, right? Like there's there's a direction. Like the concept of north does it, like it exists. It's there's ways in which it exists, even if humans and culture disappear from the world forever. But like a strand is it's much more contingent. It's much more kind of relating to the world as it exists today. But yeah, Bitcoin is much more single strandy than Ethereum is, I think, is my way of putting it.
Yeah, and I think you have been recently really into pluralism, which I think can kind of also differentiate between Bitcoin and Ethereum, is that there is much more
Yes.
pluralism in the Ethereum world than there is in
I
Bitcoin
think that's
world.
that's absolutely true, and I think that's definitely something that I also like intentionally try to be supportive of. Right, like this is one of the things that I definitely like. I'm sure I don't succeed at 100% of the time, but I try to be careful about, which is if I have any perspectives of my own, I definitely don't want to like impose and say, hey, yeah, if you have a perspective very divergent from this, then you can't be an Ethereum. Whereas, because like if you try to
Right.
do too much, like there's definitely like a little bit of that sometimes can be worth doing, and there's definitely specific groups that it can kind of strategically be good good to exclude because it creates just a healthier community. But like in general, if that's your default mode of relating to things, then like you end up kind of agreeing with yourself more and more all the way up until you realize that you've just completely destroyed your pluralism, and that's I don't think something that we want to do.
No, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the DAO hack, like that happening so early in like Ethereum history, was like a pretty influential like moment for maybe like your type of thinking, and also like the direction that maybe Ethereum was going at that point. For me, I feel at this point, looking back, it was like the best thing that could have happened to Ethereum.
Do you know who's the
Because it did,
do you know
I
who's the
feel like,
only other person I know who's like super excitedly pro DAO fork in the same way? Like doesn't even say it's a necessary evil, but just like says excitedly it's great. It's
I'm
Vlad
worried here.
Zamfir. Yeah.
Oh, okay, wow.
Yeah,
I'd
he's
love
an
to talk to him at some
interesting
point.
guy. I feel like you'd
But
get along with him really well.
yeah, but I think like the DAO, like to me, it seems like it because you had basically like the Bitcoin community like generally kind of came to Ethereum in the beginning, and then you had this like critical moment, the DAO hack, where like people had been talking about code is law for a very long time, or I mean relatively long time, and so like to sort of to come to that, to the point of like where a decision needs to be made, it kind of by reverting the blockchain, you kind of like defeated like this monster of code is law, or like a thinking that whatever was sort of like said in the contract is therefore like the word of God, which I think it's, for some reason, I think that you can map a little bit on the political spectrum, like people who believe in like these very like code is law, like very hard truths, or like they want to have like very hard, simple, clear rules to sort of like administer things, which to me is a bit, to me is authoritarian. Which then, because you guys like went against that, it kind of like it like got it shed off all of the like more hardcore for me like more right-leaning libertarians, not all of them but a lot of them, and then sort of kept maybe the more nuanced
Right.
libertarians, I would say, in Ethereum.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think my own kind of internal mental narrative around the DAO fork had to do with a pretty similar ideas to what eventually ended up being that blog post on convex and concave thinking that I would publish about 4 years later, right? Like basically the idea being that like it is coherent to believe in a principle without assigning that principle literally infinite weight. And like it's
Right.
that I feel like Bitcoin ideology, or at least a lot of it, almost like it at least pretends to explicitly oppose that, right? Like they even would say things like, you know, if Bitcoin ever has more than 21 million units, then it is by definition not Bitcoin. And like that's a testable prediction, and you can bet against it. And I definitely I would bet at least a 10% chance that 25 years from now, the thing that people call Bitcoin has more than 21 million units of it. So yeah, I mean, like,
Yeah.
you know, definitions are not kind of like hard mathematical theorems. They're strands. They're, you know, things that exist in groups
Right.
of people.
Yes. So I think this is like a very, very key aspect of like right-wing politics. I think a lot of the time is like wanting these like very hard, clear definitions that like X is X and Y
Right.
is Y. And there cannot be like, you know, bleed over, which is why I think, of course, you have, I mean, just to take one example, like, you know, with the whole, like, with gender and things like this, you know, like men are men and women are women, and there's no, like, you know, they simply can't break out of
Right.
that binary. But anyways,
Yeah. No.
I
It's,
think that's a big aspect of it.
I mean, that's, I just don't see how that kind of like category-driven thinking is even going to survive the 21st century. Like, you know, we're already talking about splitting unit of account from medium of exchange, right? And you know, in the and over the next century, you know, we're going to get the ability to radically change our own biology. We're going to get the ability to, you know, have very different ways to cooperate with each other, and have radically different social systems where, you know, even like the question of what is free speech, like that was that's one that kind of has changed in a lot of subtle ways over the last 2 decades, basically because we've created this new, like, corporations and tech platforms have basically become this new intermediary layer. And you know, people who kind of came up with those earlier versions of the principles almost, you know, didn't really expect that intermediary layer would be so dominant, right? And so, you know, you have this question of like, well, you know, if the intermediary layer is opinionated, is that an exercise of its freedom, or is that an infringement of you know, the people that are stuck under its network effect? And yeah, no, you know, we're gonna have you know, even more weird debates like that over the next century to come, and you know, it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how, you know, assuming well, there's kind of like a little bit of an obstacle, I think, but assuming that crypto isn't too politicized as just like through just its existence, or like the mechanisms, whether or not, you know, how things end up being to where issues in blockchain world sort of don't neatly map on current existing like understandings of politics or political frameworks. But I was actually curious to ask you this: if are there any like let's say radical left wing like writers or thinkers that you particularly like enjoy reading, or like have influenced you at all? I know
Yeah,
you've mentioned David
I was
Graeber
about to say
before.
David Graeber. I think he's definitely kind of up
Okay.
there more than you know, any other person. I mean, I thought like the debt the first 5,000 years was a fascinating book. I mean, the core thesis that like basically you know, formalized the money, like basically emerged, you know, like even not as a natural equilibrium of trade, but basically as a response to kings demanding it to be used for payment of taxes. it's a fascinating thesis. It kind of echoes seeing like a state in a lot of ways, right? Like, even though I feel like these days seeing like a state tends to be kind of considered to be like a little bit right libertarian coded, but the first 5,000 years is like more left. But it feels like there's it's a very common strand in there. There's also just like various little things, right? Like about 10 years ago, I remember reading this document called The Anarchist FAQ. I forget who the author is or who the authors are, right? But I just exactly. I mean, but it was like it was a fascinating document, and I think like it's just its core idea of like, hey, we can imagine like lots of different non-hierarchical ways of organizing society. Like I think even if I was I was not convinced by a lot of the arguments for like their specific implementations, but I think the way that document ended up kind of opening my mind was definitely fascinating and important.
Yeah, I think that's it is interesting that definitely more anarchist leaning people I think are also more attracted to cryptocurrency or crypto world, and there is sometimes I think at least for me like there are a lot of people who call themselves anarchists in the crypto world, but who maybe have not actually read any anarchist thinkers, or they consider anarchy or anarchism as like a right-wing ideology as well, akin to like I guess what I would call more like conservative libertarianism.
This is the whole anarchist, anarcho-capitalist terminology debate. One of the many things that was discussed in the Politics and Society Forum on Bitcoin Talk in 2012. That brings back memories.
Right. Yeah. But I guess at this point, I mean, do you have any fears about, I mean, basically what potentially could be the side effects at the moment where like crypto has been so far, like as far as like mainstream political discourse has been largely embraced by like right-wing political figures. Like you can think of like Ted Cruz or like people in the Conservative Party in the UK as well. I know that like just like a couple of weeks after he left office, I think Boris Johnson is like a keynote speaker at like a blockchain business conference, which I found like kind of ridiculous. But yeah, I guess I don't know. Do you have any thoughts like on like the problems that this could potentially bring?
So here is one of my several angles on this issue, and I think it's an important one. I think there was this kind of Twitter debate a few days ago about like, is there a leftist case for crypto, right? And Jacobin basically said that there isn't. And I think my view on this is that I think the strongest economically egalitarian case for crypto is actually the internationalist case, right? It's ultimately, we do live in a kind of very deeply kind of America-centric society, on the internet in just a whole bunch of very subtle ways, like even in just incredibly trivial things, like how I think in one of my tweets I casually mentioned that I had spent more than the last month of my life living in towns with populations of less than 3,000, and people kept trying to guess where they are, and they gave a couple of locations in like Colorado, and I'm like, dude, none of the places I had in mind there are even within 5,000 kilometers of Colorado. So and so. Exactly.
Americans.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, right, is that I feel like the developing world has some of the most even genuine use cases for crypto, in the sense that here's communities where they're deriving real value from even just cryptocurrency today, from the ability to use it to save money, because in the places where they are at that time. Fiat currency doesn't work. Often they're locked out of mainstream financial systems. Centralized financial intermediaries, either don't see enough profit in trying to serve them, or they just kind of write off entire regions of the world as being high risk. And so, there are all of these communities in Argentina, Turkey, Nigeria, all of these kinds of places that are using crypto and engaging with the crypto space more and more. I should probably add it's a very special case, but obviously worth adding Ukraine to that list, right? Cryptocurrency did end up being a lifeline for them in basically the first couple of years when pretty much everything else broke, and it was difficult for them to do anything. Eastern Europe in general, lots of even if you branch out from there and you start going into the Balkans or wherever, lots of crypto activity and lots of really meaningful stuff. There's projects trying to do payments for refugees, right? That's one of the big topics that Ukrainians are concerned about. It's remittances in general, big topic in places like Romania, and Latin America and Africa, the same thing. Fivefold, right? And then the flip side of that is that I think the international angle is one of the biggest weaknesses of mainstream political leftism, right? Like if I had to, make fun of kind of mainstream political leftism in one sentence, I would just say, look, its egalitarian program lacks all sense of scale. The divide between any identifiable groups within a country is economically speaking, maybe 1.2x, maybe 1.5x, maybe 2 to 3x. Well, what's the divide between equally skilled workers in the US and Haiti? It's potentially more than 10x, right? Or the 2/3 of the inequality in the world, if you measure by Gini coefficients, is between countries, and 1/3 is within countries, right? If you just look at all of the numbers, or what is basically the form of institutionalized apartheid that we still consider to be a totally normal part of the world. Go to my passportindex.com and look up where you can travel to as an American versus as a Chinese person versus as an Indian versus as a Nigerian, right? These are things that national political systems just are not interested in fixing, both because obviously there's no votes in fixing it. Nigerians can't vote in US elections. And I do think that unfortunately, because of geopolitical competition, we are entering an era of less interest in principles and just more kind of nationalist selfishness. And at the same time, at the same time, the international angle, that is something that crypto is great at, right? If you compare crypto to just even any other tech industry, right? So if you look at AI, for example, where is AI headquartered? Basically, you're either in Beijing or Hangzhou, or you're in Silicon Valley, right? When I visited the Silicon Valley at the beginning of September, I basically managed to visit half the the AI space, right? OpenAI was there, Anthropic is there, a couple of people in various other projects were there. If you look at biotech, it's also similarly concentrated. You got your Silicon Valley, you got your Boston, you got maybe one or two other places, and that's it. Crypto is not like that at all, right? The Ethereum Foundation's biggest office is in Berlin. The Ethereum Foundation's hub in America is in Denver. Some of the most amazing communities that we have are in places I mentioned Argentina. We have an excellent one in Taiwan. We have a great one in Singapore. There's just on Twitter, you can you just always see all kinds of people from Turkey, reaching out and trying to talk to us, right? And if you look at where the projects are, where the developers are, it is everywhere, right? And so I think yeah, like if we want a more like egalitarian crypto space, I think like fully leaning into the internationalism and into the potential to create a world that's like more equal, not just within countries, but particularly between countries. I think that potentially, could be the way to go.
Yeah, that is actually a very big one for me as well. I mean, I think that's generally like, I mean, if we're, you know, Marx calls like socialism as like an international effort. It's that it's not like you can't have socialism in one
Yes.
country, for example. So like one of the things that I am really interested in is like these cross border like like the ability to coordinate across border without having to being able to get around the obstacles that would be naturally involved whenever you are dealing with like different national jurisdictions, of course. So yeah, I think that is a very strong one that is generally kind of not really thought about, because I think people generally are thinking about, when they think about politics, they're generally thinking about it like politics in one country versus another country, or like within national borders, and rarely are thinking about kind of cross border collective action, I guess.
Yes.
Or cross border collusion.
Exactly.
You may say.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, right? Because like existing political systems, they do often tend to see cross-border collective action as being, quote, foreign interference. But
Right.
like whether something is cooperation
True.
or collusion, like it is in the eye of the beholder, and it kind of depends a lot on like your perspective on like which mechanisms are the legitimate ones and which ones are kind of the attempted usurpers that are trying to interfere in everything. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like riffing off of this, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like what could potentially be a mass adoption event in politics when it comes to crypto.
That is,
I mean, you kind of have like, I was just gonna say that you kind of have, I guess, like kind of small attempts of like, I don't know, I think Andrew Yang maybe did something with crypto once, but it hasn't really gotten big. You have like maybe Ted Cruz being like going at the Bitcoin conference or whatever, saying that crypto is freedom, but
yeah, no,
it hasn't really
like
culminated yet.
the biggest politics thing we've seen with crypto realistically is like the stuff that Bukele tried to do, but I feel like that was just like that failed
Yeah.
because it was centralized, right? Like it just completely, failed to get local legitimacy, and ended up not being super interesting as a result. I think it feels like it's part of the bigger question, which is like, what is the next application or set of applications that's really gonna break out and become big? Like once obviously, money has or and by money I'm including this whole bundle of concepts that really should be split up, like whether it's international payments or savings or whatever it is that people wants to do. So what could come next, right? Like one of the things that could come next is DAOs becoming more and more successful, and people using them to like basically organize kind of cooperation flash mob style, and create projects that are like around specific goals, potentially have shorter lifetimes that just like spin up much and get some tasks done much more quickly. It could be, I mean, something on the more institutional side would be, government adoption of like some crypto-based, could be voting system, could be like some kind of just accepting it for their, part of their identity infrastructure in some way. There's like weak versions of that exist already, right? There's like I think a couple of very small countries that
Right.
have some e-residency programs that are crypto or connected to blockchain tokens in some form. There's the possibility that one of these small countries is going to like actually release a CBDC on chain one of these days, and we'll just learn about it one day on Twitter, just or potentially it'll be on Farcaster or whatever other or Lens Protocol, whatever thing 2 or 3 years from now. I mean, it's also possible that one of these crypto social projects itself is going to start getting traction, and in the process of getting traction, it'll like empower some community that doesn't really exist yet, or at least is not very strong yet, and that's going to have some kind of political impact. So yeah, I don't know. A lot of things could happen.
Yeah. I guess other. I'm wondering for you actually as well, if there are any. You've mentioned before that you would like to see more left-wing use cases. I think maybe once before. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on like what those could be that you would like to see.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think. Well,
you're hoping that I would answer it.
Definitely, yeah. Would be happy to hear your the answer that you've mentally pre-committed to after I give mine. I think mine is like, I mean, first of all, left wing is like a super broad term, right? So, like for example, if we make an insurance system that is, somehow based on like small groups vouching for each other, and this is something that just it's like a form factor that works really well for farmers in Kenya, right? Like, is that left leaning? I mean, I would argue it is, and it empowers low income people and gives them access to the economy. But on the other hand, you could argue that like, hey, fundamentally, like the thing is still insurance, and it's still financial.
Right.
Another one might be, if you start looking into DAOs, right? Like, what could you make DAOs for? Like, could a labor union be a DAO? Could you use DAOs to just like for various kinds of like collective commitment gadgets where everyone signs up agreeing to do something, and but only if a particular number of other people sign up to do it at the same time, and possibly there might even be some kind of deposit involved to like encourage people to actually follow through. It could be in different forms, and like maybe that style of commitment kind of just solving the coordination problem could end up, out competing existing techniques for solving the coordination problem that are kind of more centralized and, end up giving a centralized actor just like a huge amount of leverage over the whole situation, right? So like one example might be, imagine if like, here's how you might organize a crypto conference, right? So everyone puts down $100 as a ticket. And when they put down a ticket, they provide a list of locations and like location time pairs, right? So like points in space time where they would be willing to have that conference. Then you have a contract on chain that has the rule that if any particular point in space time, so like pair of location and date reaches 500 people, then it grabs up everyone's deposits. And so it, if you have people that kind of multi-committed to a bunch of different possible options, that kind of withdraws their commitments from every other option, it grabs up their deposits, and then it puts the thing into a DAO, and you basically you have a kind of ownerless shelling point around the idea that you are going to have an event at this particular point in time, and here's this kind of democratically managed pool of money to like make some infrastructure happen, but like realistically, it's the value is primarily in just like the people being there to meet each other, right? So like a crypto conference is not inherently a left-wing thing, but the fact that you're organizing a crypto conference in that way, instead of organizing it in such a way that, big exchanges get to advertise how awesome they are. And, you have, FTX sponsoring it for $25,000. And, you have like all kinds of weird deals going on in exchange for speaking privileges and all that. Like the fact that you've substituted for that, like, you could call that left-leaning, right? So yeah, like it all depends on what your definition is, right? Like, are we trying to, create alternative ways to do a kind of economic activity? Are we explicitly trying to, have some kind of political outcome? Are we trying to, make a more efficient version of an organization that is already generally run in a nonprofit way today? Are we trying to do something in a nonprofit style that is being done in a for-profit style today? Like, there's a lot of different ways to think about the problem. I
Yeah.
think it's open to people's imaginations.
No, yeah, no, I think I totally I kind of like that you actually frame it this way, because indeed, like, of course, when people use left or right, they like each person basically has their own definition of what that means, and that could like be wildly different than someone else's conception of what left and right is, and those words are just kind of like heuristics to pertain usually to some kind of like historical meaning around like how politics is done in one way or another, in one country or another. But yeah, I guess I generally try to define left as being, I guess, sort of like skeptical of capitalism and wanting to move to a different form of mode of production, something that is more socialized as far as like who owns the means of production. And maybe like, of course, you could be like if you're a social democrat or something like that, then maybe that's more like center left or something like that.
Actually, yeah.
But as far as
for
use
kind
case,
of your definition, is a UBI leftist or not?
I think it highly depends on the implementation. Okay. Like I think that Andrew Yang's proposal was really bad. Like I think if you're trying to create a UBI to like remove all of the like social welfare, to like you want to get rid of like benefits that like people with handicap get, or like all these different already existing welfare programs, and replace it all with a UBI. I think that is like a right-wing version of UBI, because I think what you're doing is basically you're financializing basically someone's disability, for example, or like the fact that they are maybe less well off, because what would likely end up happening, I would say, is that probably prices would just increase, or like people would then have to kind of like budget all of their money towards like needing to be able to afford their medication, or like to be able to like do the things that their disability program would have done anyways. It would privatize those things. So I think on the left, we're generally geared more towards universal basic services. So like, nationalized healthcare, for example, or universal healthcare systems as a basic service, rather than like giving you money to go to the private market to afford healthcare. Because it sort of, it removes like those specific sectors from needing to make a profit.
So like for you, it's an important part of the concept is like basically, trying to deal with market failures that go beyond just some people by no fault of their own not having enough tokens to participate in the market. So kind of explicitly saying that that's not the only problem.
Basically.
Okay.
Right. So I think like a UBI could be good. It could be like a very left-wing thing, in the sense that if you are like keeping all of your universal basic services, and on top of it, you have a UBI that maybe is helpful for one reason or another. Of course, it depends on how you're organizing your entire economy, but like there are, of course, probably good reasons to want to do a UBI within like a economically left framework that doesn't succumb to like trying to monetize everything, or put everything into like free markets. But as far as use cases go, I'm also like very interested as far as labor unions go, because I think that a labor union is kind of like it is like all of these like really interesting and new questions and like problems that people are kind of thinking about when it comes to DAOs around organization, I think have already been explored, or to some extent, a lot of these questions within labor unions, and also within like worker cooperatives, for example. So like, I think those two forms of organization are really interesting and are ones that could benefit from taking advantage of like the affordances that blockchains or crypto brings if they were to like do it in like a smart way. 'Cause I think what my biggest fear is that a lot of them are going to try to do it and they're going to do it in a very bad way, or they're going to do it in a way that like that just completely like defeats the purpose, or like they just do it poorly, and then everyone's going to be like,
Hey,
see,
here's Solidarity
there's no
coin.
point
Buy
to use
now while it's
blockchain or
still
crypto.
cheap.
Yeah, exactly. So like I've had, you know, in my several years of trying to keep up with, you know, and trying to find anything left wing in the crypto world, or like just becoming aware of attempts at it. There have been a lot of really bad attempts, you know, like I've seen like, you know, Marx coin, or like, you know, commie coin, or like as if they're basically just doing the exact same thing as like any shitcoin does, but then putting a veneer of like left-wing politics over it. And it like, and then it really frustrates me because other people will see that and they'll be like, oh geez, oh, this is so stupid. And I'm like, yes, it is stupid, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like the whole concept of like launching a thing that is like structurally identical to Bitcoin, but then expecting it to have very different effects just because you know, you have marketing language that says like, hey, this coin is intended for the community of compassionate people, and you know.
This is the nice people token. Only nice people can buy it. Like, no, it's not gonna happen. But yeah, but I think what you said earlier, I think was really interesting about like attestation, like in labor unions. So I think the group, I don't know if you know them, they're called Trust Support, or like trust.support is their website, based in Berlin. It's like a group of artists. They wrote an interesting paper, research that they did with a truckers union about using crypto or blockchains as a way to manage strikes, or like when to plan, like to coordinate with all the various people within the labor union to make sure that you have like a critical mass of people who support the strike, to then like go ahead and do that strike, so that like there's like
so sweet. They're using
basically Byzantine.
They're using the word utopian positively. Like this is what I mean by like, you know, like American culture having negativity, right? Like, you know, no, like it's, you know, we're just so used to like, you know, utopia as automatically, like the word utopia automatically being tied to the word naive, and like here it's like yeah, we're utopians, we want to see a much better world, and like let's just you know, do our best at it. I think it's lovely. I
think I think they call themselves utopian
conspirators.
Conspirators. Yeah. So they did an interesting paper on like managing like I think treating strikes. Of course, it doesn't like. I'm not saying this is the only framework you should think about it as, but like thinking of it as kind of like a Byzantine generals problem or something like that, where you need to like make like all of the generals, all of the workers who are part of the union, like you need to be sure that there's a critical mass of them to where like your strike is going to be effective. Because if you do, like it could like bite you in the butt if you do like a very bad one. And of course, there are many different ways to do this. But there are potentially ways in which like maybe it's a interesting way of, or like in your particular context, it could be useful to use a blockchain to do that. Maybe perhaps particularly in like very international contexts. Like if you're dealing with, if you want to have a strike in a company that has offices in, you know, or warehouses or whatever in so many different countries, then it would be good to know how like that you can like have some guarantees that a lot of the people in another country are you know supporting the strike.
No, it's I mean I think
this type of coordination.
Like that kind of coordination stuff is definitely I think not looked at enough as far as like blockchain and smart contract applications go.
Yeah. So I think that's one interesting one, and I think as well the lower hanging fruit though of when it comes to labor unions is just like strike funds. So just using cryptocurrency for international payments to be able to fund labor unions and strikers, because I think generally what people don't realize in a lot of countries that like strikes are pretty like they're in the legal gray zone a lot of the time, to where you know if they misstep, then their strike could be considered illegal. Like law enforcement will come in, or like they will get cut off from access to their bank accounts, and
Yeah.
unions have very, very large resources a lot of the time, like very big ones, very successful ones. They have a ton of money, like they have like huge pension funds, like they become sitting ducks basically for for banks to see, or governments to seize if like one thing goes wrong, which can like be pretty detrimental to a lot of the people who are members within the labor union. So I think like considering just like at least as a form of backup, for having backup funds to where maybe you think that your strike could come to like a point where the bank who is servicing your money maybe doesn't like you anymore because the company that you are a union against is like a client of theirs. Like these types of things I think could be things to consider when you're thinking of like a more resilient strategy for labor organizing.
Interesting. Okay. No. It definitely seems like a cool project.
Something to think about.
Definitely. Yeah, look forward to stuff like this turning into something, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So the another thing I wanted to talk about a bit is your idea or like your vision for what you've called decentralized society, which is like heavily based on the paper that you wrote with Glenn Weil and Pooja Olhaver, kind of detailing out, I guess, like how blockchains can be used in a more, I guess, well, I'd say less financial, maybe slightly more like social oriented type of way. I was wondering if you can maybe like explain a bit to you what is decentralized society.
Sure. So I think starting off with soul-bound tokens, kind of the core idea behind the decentralized that went into the decentralized society paper, right? The idea there is basically to ask, like, well, we have these tokens, and tokens that exist today are transferable. But if a token is transferable, that this is one of those like paradoxical kind of like paradoxes of coordination, right? In that the fact that a token is transferable actually is an anti-feature because or can be an anti-feature because it reduces the amount of information that token carries, right? Like if you imagine someone sitting at the top of Mount Everest giving a token to everyone who climbs up. If that token is not transferable, like let's say it's a tattoo, right, and it's a tattoo with a cryptographic signature on it or whatever, then like what do you learn about someone if you see that they have that token? Well, you learn that they climbed Mount Everest. Now, what if instead it's a transferable token? What do you learn about someone who has that token? You learn that either they climbed Mount Everest, or most likely they paid $5,000 to someone else to do it and get the token for them, right? So if tokens are transferable, like it just reduces your ability to use them as a way of like getting any kind of like rich kind of context dependent, community dependent information about pretty much anyone, right? And we see examples of this causing problems in all kinds of places in, even the centralized world, right? So, I remember reading the sub article. I think it was from Rest of World, or one of those. That was basically complaining about how accounts being traded in Africa was actually turning into a safety risk because it was just so easy to get a verified high reputation account, even if you're like actually a totally not reputable driver, right? So like the fact that whatever information went into being verified as a reputable driver is tradable, like that makes that token mean much less than it otherwise would, right? And there's a lot of examples of applications that could exist in the crypto space, but that ends up not existing, right? So one example of this that's I think important to a lot of existing crypto projects is airdrops, right? So a lot of projects, they issue a token, and they want to distribute that token supply to the community. They want to be somewhat egalitarian and distributed in the token ownership. Like they don't even want, 3 VC funds to have 42% of the token supply. And they want some way of distributing it to the community. But the problem is that if you just go around and distributing it to, pretty much anyone who like interacted with your application or whatever, then like that's the sort of thing that works the first time. When Uniswap did it the first time, it worked really well. But once it becomes a pattern, then you get VC funds that try to like optimize for maximizing the probability that they get into an airdrop, and the whole thing just kind of gets farmed, and it just stops actually being a thing that gives like tokens to your community, right? And so that's one of the challenges, right? Like one thing that you might want to do is you might want to just give a token to each person, but then you have this question of like, well, it turns out you actually don't want to give tokens to just about anyone, because like you actually want tokens to go in the hands of people who are part of your community and who care about your project. Because if you just give tokens to random people, well, guess what? 90% of the recipients are just going to sell them, and you're going to flood the market very quickly. Your price will crash. And you're just not going to get anything out of it, right? So if you had if we have an ecosystem where there's just a lot more popes, for example, right? So, like proof of attendance protocol tokens for various kinds of in-person events, virtual events, specific actions that you do in connection to a protocol. If we just have like this much richer information that exists in some formalized fashion, that could then be used as proof of that I am in this community to enough of an extent that I deserve to get some tokens from this airdrop, then you could approach something that's like a little bit more fair, right? And so you could imagine these tokens, which have to be non-transferable, because if they were transferable, then VC funds would just farm them, right? Like being used for airdrops, you could imagine them being used to allocate governance voting power. That's one of those things where I've already written many times about why like you don't want that to be financialized. You could use that to be loans. Are another example. Loans are all about trustworthiness. Even something like the decentralized Ubers, like to the extent that like you want a reputation system, right? Because like ultimately, what is Uber? It's like it's a search engine, a payment processor, a map application, and a reputation system that are bundled together, right? And if you're going to make a decentralized alternative, you are going to have some reputation component, and getting that from this kind of richer information involving like proof of interactions with particular communities and proofs of positive interactions with particular people, like that's something that where you could actually even get like better reputations than we see today. And like you get the benefits of kind of more formalized reputation systems without something that can kind of be co-optable in the way that people criticize social credit scores, for example, right? And the decentralized society term, I think, is meant to just evoke the general question of like, well, what would a society look like if we had more of these kind of like formalized ways of getting this much richer information about like what kinds of relationships a person has with various other people and various communities in a way that's like both like accessible to technology, but also is done in a way that it doesn't just collapse into being yet another form of currency. And this is something that like hasn't been done that much before, right? Like we have proof of humanity and we have popes, and we have like a couple of applications using them, but like it's something that could easily go 1,000 times deeper than has been tried so far today. And like obviously, we have to solve privacy and we have to solve blockchain scalability and all these hard problems for it to get anywhere close to going 1,000 times deeper. But the paper basically asks the question of like, well, if we did have that, like, what are the things that we could build?
Yeah. So yeah, I think for sure. I mean, like you mentioned in the paper, I think it seems to be like a bit of your drive for speaking about soul-bound tokens and decentralized societies, about a desire for kind of non-financial uses for blockchains, or it may be, in fact, like as a way to decrease the financialization that exists currently, or like the bad aspects of financialization that kind of like exists in blockchain world at the moment. And doing that through like, I guess, rather than rule by capital, we have more of a rule by like by social context,
Right.
or like having social context be a more important, playing a more important role in like the ways that you would interact in
Absolutely.
blockchain world. So like so I mean, you probably know this already, but like a lot of so like in mainstream media, whenever people were talking about soul-bound tokens, it was usually in like a, oh no, like it was proposed as kind of like a dystopian thing that you were proposing, sort of like everyone should have like their entire lives on the blockchain, and then we can like, control everything or whatever. But I was wondering if you can maybe talk a bit about how people have misunderstood so your proposal for soul-bound tokens, because I think yeah, I mean, for sure I have like, of course, my own like reservations or criticisms, but I think a lot of the ones that I have read or I've heard, it seems like they misunderstood or perhaps didn't even read the paper, to be honest,
Yeah, no, I mean,
that you
I think
wrote.
there's like definitely challenging questions involved in consequences that inevitably emerge out of any kind of formalized system, right? Like, there's the whole like kind of good hard law thing of like a measure ceases to become a good measure once it becomes a target. And if your viewpoint is, especially if your viewpoint is like, well, okay, like that's exactly what happened with money, and you're inventing this thing that's going to replace money, so is it going to end up having the same problem? Which is, I mean, it's a good critique, and I think it's worth thinking about. But at the same time, like, that's something that always has to be balanced against the need for like any system at all that scales beyond 150 people, right? Like, like 150 people, it's like,
Uh-huh.
Dunbar's number, this kind of like this kind of stereotypical number for the number of people that you uh, you can kind of naturally keep track of manually. And the theory being that if he wants to go beyond that, and you want to have cooperation at scales that go beyond that, then you need to have like, well, I think people in the olden times would say you need to have hierarchy, but I think kind of the more optimistic version of that is you need formalized social systems. Like, you basically need information that can be carried just across social context to some degree, right? Like, you want Alice and Charlie to be able to have an interaction and have information with which to decide whether or not to have an interaction, even if Alice and Charlie have never heard of each other before, and maybe they've both heard of Bob, or maybe Alice has heard of Bob and Bob has heard of David and David has heard of Charlie, right? And so this question of like, well, how do we navigate that trade-off between just creating mechanisms that can scale versus making sure we don't create mechanisms that scale in ways that are horrible? And I think it's one of the kind of very practical ways of looking at this as just like, to go back to the example, right? Like, there's specific concrete needs that people, even in the crypto space today, are trying to solve for, like the token airdrop use case, right? Like, if you try to
Mm.
airdrop tokens without using, some kind of like for formal mechanism to do it, then you're basically allocating tokens by hand, right? And that's something that can, very easily get huge amounts of corruption going on, right? Like, it's did you sleep with one of the co-founders? Okay, here's 3.3% for you, and we're just gonna like casually talk about how you're important to the community early on, but like, can that actually be evaluated by anyone else? Well, not really, right? And so like informal social systems can be very unfair, and informal social systems can especially be unfair if you try to scale them beyond how hard they're meant to scale, right? And so I think I think the biggest misconception about the soulbound tokens and DSOC as a concept is that I think in its like people are not properly engaging with it in the way that it was intended, which is as an early stage idea, right? And like it's meant to basically say, here is a category of stuff that we could do, and here are some examples that show that the need for this category exists. We don't know yet which specific version of these ideas works, right? Like we're basically trying to, I think, open exploration into that category. And obviously the very first iteration that somebody thinks up of and decides to make in 48 hours in a hackathon is probably going to be terrible. It's probably not going to take into account 5 obvious issues. It's probably going to completely fail on privacy and all of these issues, right? But I think the point is that we, as an ecosystem, like start thinking about these questions, right? And start engaging with the question of like, well, to the extent that we need richer in-context information about people and people's interactions with each other that just goes beyond how many tokens do they have, like what's the actually best way to do that, right? And so I think that's like if I had to like answer the question of like what is the biggest misconception, I would say like that is the biggest misconception. The like basically people criticizing it as a finished concept where every individual like sentence is like interpreted as Vitalik and Pooja and Glenn's kind of official gospel, when the reality is like, well, no, we're just basically just trying to open more discussion, more attempts to build exactly
speculation,
more attempts to just open up this category and see what happens in that category. And I think the good thing is like there's obviously a lot of people just like yelling and giving various opinions on the topic, but there's also people trying to build, right? And I think over the next couple of years, we'll see what ideas work well and what ideas don't work well, and we'll all be in a better place for it.
For sure, hopefully. So like what I respected about it, I guess, is that there was this desire for understanding, I guess, for understanding social context, or for like not purely thinking of like users or like like users as kind of like as discrete atoms that are kind of like kind of out of the way in the beginning, how you were talking about how you thinking about kind of wanting to put things as like make things mathematical all the time. Whereas I think understanding someone's like social context and where they lie within a society and how they relate to one another is like an important thing to perhaps think about, because at the moment I think a lot of crypto and a lot of blockchain is very it's very like alienated in a sense, like where when I talk about alienation, I mean like as in one person doesn't have any context about maybe another person in which they're interacting with, maybe like through a DeFi application, and there's no relationship. So like that person is just like they're just a thing that they're interacting with, and isn't like, you kind of lose the fact that that other person is a human being. And so I think that if blockchains are to be a successful alternative, like we can't have a purely like atomized or alienated way of interacting with one another, or that one that is only purely mediated via cryptocurrency, via capital, via money, however you want to call it. That there has to be, if you want some sort of positive vision, there needs to be something else. There needs to be social context in order to do that. We need to kind of like, otherwise we're kind of treating each other as like commodities in the way that I think on social media platforms we kind of do at the moment. A lot of the time we kind of, we're over social media a big part of, I think, the strategy for social media companies has been making users feel alienated from one another, so that it's like more engaging for you to be angry and pissed off at someone else who is actually a human being on the other side of a screen. We kind of like forget the humanity of others.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think if we just look at some of the problems that like actually happen in, DeFi governance situations, for example, like that issue is pretty much exactly, the source of where the problems end up coming from.
And so like one of the, I think my probably my favorite example that you put into the soulbound tokens was related to a social recovery wallets or community recovery.
I mean, I'm a fan of both concepts,
Community.
but community recovery was the one that was in that paper.
Right. So like usually I think a big critique and a fairly I guess strong one about blockchains is that it's very difficult for a regular person who's not into this world to like be able to keep up with their private key. That if you lose your private key, you may like perhaps lose everything. And so it puts like a large onus on the individual to sort of keep up with that. And in some ways that's a positive thing. In some ways that's like its strength, because then you're relying on yourself, you're not relying on centralized entities. Like you're not relying on like the bank making sure that they still like you being their client or something. But instead, I think with social recovery wallets, as far as I understand them, it brings in it's like not a private sector solution or a public sector solution, but like using your own existing social networks as a way to back up your wallet, or as a way to, if you lose your key, then your 5 closest friends can help you out.
Yes.
If I understand exactly. Correctly. And so then community recovery wallets, I think, are really interesting in that it adds like this element of like understanding that your community or like the people that you are closest with can change over time. Because you may set up a social recovery wallet with 5 people, and then like 3 of them you're no longer friends with because you had a falling out and they don't want to help you. Instead, you can sort of base it off of the people that you are already naturally having like these relationships with.
Right.
Which I thought was an interesting
idea. Yeah. Community recovery. Yeah, it's basically taking the social recovery idea like one step further, except instead of saying you manually choose who your guardians are, it's basically saying like, hey, yeah, let's observe your the information that kind of already comes out through the just your existing interactions with other people, and we know a lot about who you interact with and who you trust, and let's just piggyback off of that information, and you get this kind of much more diverse recovery set basically for free, and just take advantage of that. So you get the benefits of recovery, and you get the benefits of being able to just have some kind of path to getting things back if something goes wrong, but we do all of this without centralizing power and specific centralized authorities, right? Because everyone's community recovery circle would end up different from everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's I thought that was like a really interesting example of where having soulbound tokens that kind of track these things as like clearly a useful thing,
right?
And I was wondering, and so like another thing that I found interesting is that soulbound is also a reference to types of items that are in World of Warcraft. And I was wondering, actually, were you ever in like a guild when you played World of Warcraft?
I was not. I was actually always a solo player.
You were a solo.
No, I was just not very social growing up, and so I don't know. I never really got into the whole talking to other people thing, and I just kind of went off to the forest and killed boars by myself.
Fair enough. I was just wondering because I recently had a interview with someone else where we talked about World of Warcraft guilds and DKP. Right. It's like Dragon Kill Points, and kind of like the organization. I was wondering if like that was kind of like slight inspiration for kind of the things that
Yeah, I don't
you've
know.
been
I mean,
talking
I
about.
definitely remember following the DKP stuff on just like WoW forums and other places. It was fascinating. I mean, I think in general, like video games are definitely an underrated source of knowledge for political science, right? Because like there's some pretty sophisticated organizations that happen inside of these things. There's some pretty sophisticated behaviors that happen inside of them. You know, pretty sophisticated markets, pretty sophisticated political organizations, and even in the pre-crypto days, there were pretty significant amounts of money at stake, right? Like I remember back in the 2005 to 2010 era, reading about Eve Online and how there are these grand battles happening in Eve Online, and there are individual ships getting destroyed that were worth $25,000. And at the time, just thinking that a purely virtual item could be worth $25,000 was just mind blowing. And of course, today we're like,
Yeah.
what, your virtual item's worth like only $25,000? Like, what are you, a noob? Like, that's like there's monkeys that have sold for like more than like millions at this point. But yeah, but
Yeah, I think no, I think it is a very interesting like place to kind of also experiment with a lot of these things and to experiment with political economy. Because so I recently spoke to a researcher named Joshua Citarella, who did like this research on World of Warcraft guilds that use DKP. And basically his conclusion was that these guilds that are using DKP are basically practicing market socialism. So they're like, so like the awkward thing about this is that this is like a group of gamers who probably are either apolitical maybe, or perhaps like more on the right generally if you were to like take stereotypes. And they're practicing a form of socialism and they don't really even know it through this like DKP system, because it's sort of DKP is a like an in guild form of currency. And so like it's not like a fully transferable thing like a normal ERC20 token.
it's an
So I think
internal economy. It's
one of the
fascinating.
basic, and they use that to kind of manage the resource, like all of the loot that they gather. They use that in guild currency to manage who like purchasing basically the loot. So like it was a really interesting like point of research, but like I've just been thinking about like how the guild that you're in over World of Warcraft like is probably it could be akin to like a type of soulbound token that you could have, and then using like using video games as a way to like experiment and simulate with different political economies as a way to experiment with soulbound tokens, I think would be a really, really fruitful way of thinking about, experimenting. Whether or not we want soulbound tokens, I guess, is of course one question, or otherwise, like how would we best implement those in a space that is not so consequential first. I guess. So, do you know any soulbound token video games that are coming out
Not yet. I'm sure things will happen. I mean, there obviously have been lots of tokenized video games in the last 2 years, but I think like the main, I think, error that most of them made is that they forgot that they have to be fun games even outside of the financial speculation aspect, right? And so, but that's why I think some of them ended up, being having a lot of really amazing results for a while, and then as soon as the bear hit, everyone just kind of left. I think if someone cracks that, like if someone makes a game that's both actually fun and where there are meaningful like extra things that actually are useful that come out of soulbound tokens or any other kind of token, then like that would definitely be an application of like a blockchain application that's like actually really useful and valuable. But we'll see if it happens.
Yeah. And I was wondering, have you read David Graeber's most recent book?
I've read part of it, so I think maybe the first few chapters. I thought the first chapter that was kind of the exposition that was basically saying that like, hey, look, this idea that liberalism is a white people thing, like, is actually very misleading. And like, actually, in the 17th century, Europe was a very hostile and illiberal place. And by the way, a lot of the liberal ideas and even free market thinking, came from Arabs in the 10th. 500 years earlier. I think that was even in debt the first 5,000 years. And then that a big part of why the kind of liberal enlightenment happened was because it incorporated critiques from Native Americans about the kind of restrictive European social order of the 17th century. I mean, it's a really fascinating argument, and it definitely makes you think, like, what kinds of other kind of social connections and intellectual kind of lineages exist today that we don't even realize.
Yeah. So like part of that book, what was interesting to me is how he talks about all of how like governance mechanisms, that in their research they found, like, usually what how a lot of these things developed was by simulating different governance mechanisms during like festivals or during like particular holidays. Was kind of part of the book where for one day, all of the children are like heads of the tribe or something like that, or so like they would like experiment with different ways of like basically like role playing, I guess, for like bounded limited times. And to me, it was like and it's just like the kind of equivalent to that in like a world where we have very strict and very like rigid hierarchical systems, to where it's very difficult to kind of do that same amount of experimentation in a meaningful sense. I feel like video games are like a very good new medium for sort of exploring that and then using that as like a way to explore different political economies. And I think crypto tools especially are really potentially helpful in sort of mediating those new
absolutely.
experiments. Yeah. All right. I think I've had you for 2.5 hours, so I don't want to hold you for too much longer if you probably have stuff to do.
No, I do.
But maybe if you have just one last question, I think to end it off, as for you, what does a successful Ethereum ecosystem look like in a decade?
I think to me, a successful Ethereum ecosystem includes so first of all, much broader variety of applications, right? So like, I would love to see just all of the the various strands that we talked about today, just all of the various even strands that people have been thinking about and have kind of been in the white papers and the literature already since 2014, kind of properly develop, and hopefully we just get a much bigger diversity of stuff being built. Like, hopefully, we get to the point where there is something else that is at least as big as DeFi, and that people get excited about as much as people get excited about DeFi. Whether that's called DSOC, or whether that's called distributed identity and reputation, or whether that's called Web3, or whatever it ends up being, like, just having something else other than DeFi that's as big as DeFi. Like, that's I think a milestone that would definitely be really important and big. Another aspects to a successful ecosystem, I think, is just who has the ability to contribute, right? So I just want to see more and better efforts to like just even help the ecosystem understand its the various people that already exist within the different corners of the Ethereum world, and to kind of better connect people with all kinds of ideas, with the opportunity to kind of actually develop those ideas and bring them out into action, right? Like, it's it would be interesting to see like 4 different spins on the concept of DSOC or the concept of DAOs that just come out of different groups of people, possibly people with different political leanings, possibly people coming out of different countries and different continents, and to just have these different ideas that are interacting with each other. I think another thing that matters to me in a healthy ecosystem is kind of good, high quality intellectual ecosystem. Like one of the things that I love about Ethereum, and I think this was very true in early Ethereum, and I think it's diluted a bit since then, but it's the and I think some of that dilution is just inevitable due to scale, but I think it's something that, like, with a lot of intentional effort, can easily be repaired. Is that, like, the Ethereum ecosystem was just a place where people who had interesting ideas could come and talk about interesting ideas, and it was a place where all of these different visions about what a better world would look like were like actually interacting with each other, and creating more spaces like that, and like even helping the Ethereum ecosystem kind of do a better job of being that kind of space is something that I would want to see a lot more of, and I think it's something that would be helpful to the ecosystem's ability to like generate more and like actually interesting applications. I think, and of course, there's kind of the negative goals. So, what traps to not fall into. The biggest one is, to not become maximalist in the way that Bitcoin has become maximalist. So, I think, we've done an okay job at that so far, but that's just like the the circling the wagons mindset is just like such a natural one for people that it's something that just requires, I think, a lot of constant vigilance to make sure that you don't fall into. Um, yeah, no, I
Right.
think if we have all of those things, and we have obviously also an ongoing, just like amazing technical ecosystem that can actually build out all the technology, so all of these applications actually can happen, and we don't, and the fees don't have to be $5; they can be less than 1 cent, and we can have privacy, and you can have better user experiences and all of these things. Like, with all of that together, I think we're going to have a great ecosystem.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. Thanks so much for coming on and taking the time. Hopefully this is the beginning of a longer discussion that I'm sure that we'll be having over time as Ethereum evolves and as it changes and as the world changes.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you too.